Hey, welcome back once again, Knicks fans. Hope you guys are ready for this one. Today, I am reviewing and evaluating the job that Tom Thibodeau did this year as a coach. Man, right off the back, as you guys see here, I gave him a D plus. However, because because this is a pretty harsh grade, and because I've had a lot to say about his coaching this season, I felt like I definitely owe you guys a systemic approach to evaluating his performance this year, and that's pretty much what I did here. And so over here, I have factors that I feel that contribute towards him doing a good job or having a successful season. And so it's and we're gonna go through it. So for each role or each factor, I basically gave the coach a grade, and then I assigned a number next to each of the grade. Like for example, A is 1, B is 2, C is 3, D is 4, and F is 5, right? And so I already see a mistake here. And so that's pretty much what we did. That's what I did here. And like I said, I just wanted a systemic way to evaluate the coach's performance this season, and that's pretty much what we have. So, before we get too far into this, please hit like, subscribe, please. Really appreciate it. Feel free to comment below. I had one whopping person who made a comment on my last video. Really appreciate it. Huge shout out to that, the viewer. I really wish I remembered the name. On the next video that I drop, promise to give him a shout out by his name. But I appreciate it. I've been really trying to get more engagement on this channel, really struggling with it. So I really appreciate you guys watching, but I would even appreciate it more if you guys like and subscribe, and then also comment below. And so the first thing, we're going to get right into it. The first thing we're going to do is basically list all these factors here, and then we're going to basically talk about each one and how I arrived at each of these grades here. And so the first one is all-season player development and in-season player development. So basically, it's I gave two letter grades. I gave a letter grade for each one, assigned a number to it, and then took the average of both to give me an idea what his performance was in this area. And so for off-season player development, you guys have heard me basically. I've talked about how I think I like his approach to developing players, especially in the off-season. And the reason why I like his approach, because at least, it's probably a low bar for me, because I know he has a plan, right? He clearly states that he has a plan for each of the players in the off season. He states that he likes to work with each of the players in the off season. And then the other thing I like about him too, he's not afraid to use the summer league for the second year players like he did last year. Although we made the playoffs and the IQ and Obi did play in the playoffs, and actually especially Obi had a good playoff series, although it wasn't a lot of minutes. The one against the Hawks, he still was not afraid to ask them to play in the summer league, and which was good. Obviously, the good thing about that too, because he specifically talked about, look, he worked on a lot of things with the young players one-on-one before summer league, and he wanted those players, he wanted IQ and OB to basically try some of those things out that they worked on in practice in the live game situation. And so I really did like that. I like that approach to it, and I kind of hope it continues. I really do hope it's as good as it sounds. But like I said, I'm not a coach. It's a really low bar for me. Because it is a low bar, because all he said is he has a plan and he works with each individual player. But that's good enough for me, and it was good enough for me to give him an A, because I really do like that. Because also the previous regimes that we had, it was never clear that these guys were even really working with our young players in the off season, and obviously what did I say? The proof is in the pudding. And so before Thibs came along, you see what we got from our young players. And after Thibs came along, we've seen improvement from year over year from our young players. We saw a huge improvement from Obi Toppin from one year to the next, right? And we also saw improvement from IQ. IQ's improvement didn't come until towards the end of the season, but as you guys remember, he switched over from being basically a two guard or a combo guard to playing more strictly point guard role for this team. And so he came on pretty strong towards the end of the season, and it was good. And so that's the reason why I give the coach A for off season player development, because I've seen improvement and I've seen proof. So for in season player development, I gave the coach a D. And it seems harsh, and the reason why I did that was because part of in-season player development is actually giving the kids playing time. And the coach really refused to give these kids like adequate playing time. He would give them very sporadic minutes. I felt like a lot of times Obi was playing like 8 to 10 minutes a game in stretches this season. And IQ was the only one who was getting pretty good minutes. Although he was struggling on the offensive end later in the season. But to his credit, one of the reasons why IQ was getting a lot of playing time, even though he was struggling offensively, was because of, number one, we were shorthanded at the point guard position. But number two, his defense really helped keep him on the court. He was actually, this whole year, he was probably our most consistent perimeter defender this whole year. So I have to give him credit for that. However, you can't help but to see there's definitely a relationship between Thibs and IQ. Thibs really liked IQ. And so, he definitely showed a lot of favoritism towards IQ, gave him a lot of chances. IQ basically can do whatever he wants. IQ will come down and jack up a half-court shot. He can do it a couple of times, and the coach won't even take him out the game. And one of them could be an air ball. The other one can just hit the backboard. It doesn't matter. He'll still keep him in the game. But if Obi Toppin did something similar to that, Obi Toppin only has to basically throw out one air ball, and the coach is pulling him out the game. And so that's the one bad thing about the player development from the coach, because he just showed favoritism. When you show favoritism, it's very difficult. It's very difficult for basically the players to take what you have to say seriously, number one. And then number two, is very difficult for them to basically even play hard or play in such a way, because it's almost like if you're showing favoritism and you don't reward the young players for playing well, and you, like when they're playing well, you still give them only 8 to 10 minutes a game, right? And when they're playing bad, you give them a quick hook and they play only like 5 or 6 minutes a game. I mean, you can't do that. The only people that he did not do that to was IQ, obviously, and then of course he showed a lot of favoritism to Julius Randle. That was just a little out of hand. So the other reason why I gave him a D for in-season player development was because I feel like during the season, he basically, one of the coach's main responsibility during the season, especially when you have as many young players as the Knicks have, you have to inspire confidence in your players, right? Like I said previously, you can't pull players for every minor mistake that they make, and then when they play well, you don't reward them by giving them extended minutes. That's not a recipe for success. It's not a recipe to give your players confidence. Obviously, we even saw that from Obi Toppin this year. Although he shot 52% from the field the whole year, so even though the coach was giving him 8 to 10 minutes here and there, sometimes 5 to 6 minutes, and then there were times he would get 15 minutes. But Obi Toppin, basically, he actually had a very strong will. He was very steady, and he was mentally strong, and he was still able to be very efficient from the field and play within himself. However, you can tell Obi Toppin even talked about how, the coach basically, he was just afraid to make a mistake when he was on the court, because the coach would pull him for every mistake that he made. And so every time he make a mistake, he's looking over his shoulder, and he just ended up causing him to play a lot tighter than he wanted to play. And so that's an issue. That is the coach's fault. Your job is not to take confidence away from the young players. Your job is to inspire confidence in the young players, right? And so the other reason why I gave him a D for in-season player development was every time I will consistently see him yell at Obi Toppin, right? And but he would never pull Obi Toppin aside and talk to him, nicely or anything. He just yells at him, yanks him, and just sends him to the end of the bench. Honestly, I really feel I've seen a couple of the games in person this year, the season that just passed, and honestly, I was getting the vibe that he just doesn't like Obi Toppins at all. That's really the vibe I get from this coach, that he does not like Obi Toppin. And I'm probably wrong about that, but that's definitely the way he treats Obi Toppin, and that's the way he treats a lot of his players. And so the other reason why I gave him a D as well is because his lack of communication with the young players, or even with any player on his team. When you're out of favor with Tom Thibodeau, he doesn't even talk to you to tell you exactly what you're doing wrong, what the issue is, or even how you can improve to get back into the rotation. I really thought that he was the kind of coach that would do something like that. That would basically make sure he basically let every player know exactly where they stood and what they had to do to improve. No, he doesn't do that. And and we saw it with Kemba Walker, demoted Kemba Walker, but didn't even talk to the guy, never said a word to the guy for weeks. That was just despicable and embarrassing. That is really embarrassing. He's a grown man. You're a grown man. You're the leader of this team. You need to exercise some leadership, and some good leadership, and show, that you have a good backbone, and talk to these guys and let them know what's going on. You can't just basically yank someone or constantly pull them out of a game, and you don't tell them exactly what they need to do to improve, or even talk to them calmly about some of the things that they need to that they did wrong, that they need to improve on. And so that's why I gave him a D for in-season player development. Now, player rotation, I gave him a flat-out F on that one. Yeah, I mean, there was no flexibility with his rotations whatsoever. He constantly left the starters way too long in the game, even when they were struggling, especially in the third quarter. A lot of times when they're struggling, he would just keep them in there and not even try to bring in the reserves a little earlier to give the starters their spell. It was just terrible. The other thing too, he would constantly play the starters 37 plus minutes a game, 38 minutes a game. He did that consistently with the starters, and then ask them to play both ends of the court, play defense and play offense, but you will need them to play it for 38 minutes a game every game. I thought that was a little too much. That was a little crazy. And in my opinion, I also gave him, I feel like he was responsible for the injury to Derrick Rose and Kemba Walker. That is just my opinion. That's how I felt. Because throughout the season, we all talked about how, Derrick Rose is playing great. Coach is playing him 37, 38 minutes a game, and everyone's like, you know what, this seems like a lot. We'll see how long this lasts. And of course, like I said before, it just didn't last very long. Same thing with Kemba Walker. So honestly, the roster this coach was given, especially the point guard rotation he was given, basically dictated to him what his rotation was going to be. It dictated to him how many minutes he was going to play Rose and Kemba. I mean, I don't care what this coach, what they say about it. I know some people say like, you shouldn't be on his team. You shouldn't play for Thibodeau if you're not ready to play 36 minutes a game. I think that's nonsense. If the front office gave you two old point guards that can't play more than 25 minutes a game, it is asinine to play each of them 37 minutes a game until each of them break down. And now you have no point guard, and then you decide to run Alec Burks at the point guard. The other issue with the coach, the reason why he gets an F, was because he talked about how great Alec Burks was. The team rating was good when Alec Burks is on the floor, right? He is a good player. However, the coach did not even try any other rotation for any length of time to figure out if there was a better option at the point guard position. He didn't even try to put IQ at the point guard position, at the starting point guard position. He still had him coming off the bench throughout the whole year. He actually gave McBride a shot, and McBride was playing pretty well. A few games, screwed up against Toronto, pulled the kid 3 minutes into the Toronto game, and we never saw this kid play ever again. We never saw this kid play for the rest of the season until like the last 2 weeks. That was just insane. His rotation is just horrendous. And what he asks these players to do is just absurd. Playing these guys 38 minutes a game, asking them to play both ends, you can't do that. That's just, to me, that's just crazy. If you're going to ask them to play both ends of the floor, you're going to have to basically it makes sense for you to lower their minutes. Have them play 30 to 32 minutes max. You don't have a choice. If you want them to play both ends of the floor, that's what you have to do. There's not a lot of option. And also, if we're going to take a look at the stats when we look at offensive efficiency and ranking, but we were basically second to last in possessions in the league. Second to last, right? And part of the reason is because he plays a lot of the players, he plays the starters way too many minutes. Like I said, 37, 38 minutes per game for a lot of these guys. And it's, and that's what happens. The guys, a lot of these guys, a lot of our guys, they run out of gas in the fourth quarter. We saw that a lot with, not just with Julius Randle, but also with R.J. Barrett. In the fourth quarter, they would run out of gas. And so that was a huge problem. So the next thing we're going to talk about is the offensive efficiency and ranking. We're going to look at the NBA stats just to kind of look at a few stats so we can, so you guys can see why I gave him an F for this here. So what I did was so up here, the first thing I have up here is, this is advanced stats for like the entire league here, right? And so the ones I'm concerned with is offensive rating, defensive rating, and also possessions, right? And so the first thing I did up here, I ranked all the teams by offensive rating, and to figure out where the Knicks ranked amongst the league. So basically, the Knicks were 23rd in the league in terms of offensive rating. That's basically 27th percentile. So we're basically towards the bottom of the league on the offensive end. And so it just, that says it all, right? It speaks for itself. And then if we, I guess this is for the defensive rating. We'll talk about it right here real quick, because the defensive rating wasn't as that impressive. We were top half of the league. It was pretty decent, but we were 12th in the league in defensive rating. That was good for 63rd percentile. And so, it was okay, but it wasn't anything impressive, anything to write home about. And then over here, I really want to talk about the possessions. So I did a rank by possessions. We were basically second to last. And so one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about that was because obviously what we had going isn't working. The slow pace that we're playing at doesn't work. And so it benefits us to play at a faster pace. And what he did, we did try that a little bit in the second half of the season. We saw that with Julius Randle, was sometimes he would push the pace, especially in the first quarter. So they were able to get into better rhythm in the first quarter, especially towards the second half of the season. And it was working, but the problem again is Julius Randle. You can't, if you're going to ask him to push the pace, and you're going to ask R.J. Barrett, all these guys to push the pace, you can't play them 38 minutes a game and then also ask them to play on both ends of the floor. And so that's where he should have played the bench players a little more. Should have played Obi Toppin more. Now we see that Obi Toppin is actually a very good player, and that he can actually give you probably 18 to 20 points pretty efficiently, on pretty high efficiency. Also, the kid plays very fast. Not even about the shooting percent. Let's leave that aside. He's always up and down the court. He plays with a lot of pace. He's one of the fastest guys in the league. And also IQ plays a pretty fast pace. And so, but the coach didn't really do that much. He just didn't play the young players enough. If he wanted to, because the pace was slow and our offense was terrible, it would have helped, especially because he lacked imagination on the offensive end. The easiest thing for the coach to do was to basically ask the players to play with more pace. And they did that, right? They tried. But like I said, because he was playing those guys 40 minutes a game, that's not going to work. They're going to run out of gas, because you got to, at that point, if you're going to be playing at a much faster pace like that, you got to play Obi Toppin close to 20 minutes. Then you got to play Julius Randle like 28 to 30 minutes. That's what you need to do, and you need to use your full roster, at least your full roster that's productive and efficient, in order to accomplish this. And so that's pretty much the stats. Like I said, we were bottom in the league when it came to possessions, and there's nothing wrong with being about like towards the bottom in possessions, especially if you're an efficient team. But we're not efficient. We're not a very efficient team. Our starters, none of our starters were shooting over 42% from the field. We were a terrible shooting team. And so, because of that, you had to get out and run. You had to push the pace, and you had to play the young players more. But he didn't do that, and so that's why the offense. That's one of the reasons why the offense sucked. And it was an easy one. It was kind of like a easy layup for him, so to speak. And he tried it, like I said, but he just because he hates playing young players so much that he couldn't even take full advantage of the strategy that he tried to implement. So defensive ranking gave him a C on that, and some of this wasn't totally his fault because the front office gave him a couple of cabbages, and they were like cabbages on the floor, rolling around on the floor. So, and I'm talking about Kemba Walker and Evan Fournier. No disrespect to the guys; these are very excellent NBA players, and just trying to be silly. But honestly, these guys were really bad on the defensive end, and they really screwed up the team's defense. And so that's why I gave the coach a C. As you guys, and actually that was actually pretty. The only reason I gave him a C because we were ranked 63rd percentile on the. When it came to defense, it was number 12 in the league. So it wasn't like we were like top 5 or anything, or even top 10. However, gave him a C, kind of graded this on a curve because, it was mostly the front office's fault in this situation. And so the next thing we want to talk about is Tom Thibodeau and his in-game coaching strategy and communication. So, well, with this one here, obviously we talked about how he lacked, how Tom Thibodeau lacked imagination on the offensive end. And honestly, all you had to do was look at the, as I say, proof is in the pudding, right? So, if you guys think throughout this whole year, the team really executed out of timeouts and also on inbounds plays. They rarely executed out of timeouts. I feel like I could count it like on one hand when they were able to execute this year out of timeouts. That's probably a little bit of an exaggeration, but that's really what it felt like, right? And so the other problem with Tom Thibodeau, the reason why I gave him a D for in-coach strategy, in-game coaching strategy and communication was because he never made adjustments. He would constantly run the same type of offense. Everything was basically like the two-man game they would play with. With Randall, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the problem is if it wasn't working, and obviously, clearly, Randall also came into the season out of shape. Once you realize Randall came into the season out of shape, maybe you should have diversified the offense a little bit. Maybe you should have had Kemba Walker playing more of a point guard role, actually the playmaker role, being more of a playmaker, but he didn't do that. And kind of going back to the rotations too, he didn't even test different rotations. He was unwilling to try different rotations to try to see if he can find something that works. So there was just a lack of imagination, lack of flexibility from the coach overall throughout the games. The other thing was he never gets the ball in the hands of his most efficient players. And the most efficient players he has was Mitchell Robinson and Obi Toppin. Those were a couple of his most efficient players, big men. And it just wasn't, they should have ran more plays to try to get them rolling to the rim on pick and rolls. That was a crazy thing too with Obi Toppin. Like as good as he was, they did a little bit in the first early in the season where they ran pick and rolls for him, but it was just crazy that they didn't run pick and rolls for this guy throughout the whole year. Because of the way he moves, he creates a lot of gravity. Because he moves so quickly, he creates even lanes for for the ball handler, and also it makes it very difficult to basically. It makes if he's on the same side with the ball handler with the playmaker, it makes it very difficult for his man to double the ball handler because he moves with a lot of speed. He's always constantly in motion, and so that really helps the offense. But the coach didn't even do that. He didn't bother trying any of that when it mattered during the season, and we only saw Obi Toppin towards the end of the year. What, the last 2-3 weeks or so, and so basically it was too little, too late, right? And like I said, the other thing too was like they just. I think I already said it. They just kept going to Julius Randle. They just keep going to plays that just never worked, and it's just the offense was just it made the offense extremely predictable, right? And so it made it easy for defenders to key in on Julius Randle, and because essentially you're giving Julius Randle the ball every time to go 1-on-1 and basically to read and react, right? And so basically give the Julius Randle the ball, freaking posted up at the 3-point line, and then Julius is either gonna take dribbles and then take a fadeaway, or if he gets like double team, he may pass the ball and he'll pass it out to an open person at the 3-point line. And it really hit me towards the end of the season that, especially watching RJ, when RJ became the primary playmaker, you know, I started realizing that RJ was a better playmaker because he was getting his teammates shots at the rim. Julius Randle was getting us open shots at the 3-point line. Layups are much easier than 3-pointers, and so that's why I just felt like, Barrett was just a better playmaker than Julius. But the coach didn't even realize any of this. He never even made the adjustments. IQ was probably one of their better playmakers on the team, although he struggled as a playmaker, but they just didn't go to him early enough. If they would have played him more earlier enough in the season and probably had him as the starter, maybe he would have actually, gotten his footing by Christmas time and probably had a good season. But, the coach didn't do that. He wasn't willing to try anything new, and it is what it is. But going back to his in-game coaching strategy and communication, it just wasn't good. And then the other thing too was Mark Berman is the first person who actually started talking about this. And then when I went to the last game, I did look at the coach, and I noticed that it's true. He never talks to his assistant coaches and during the games, and so he's not getting input from different people. It's just all Thibodeau in his own head, and he thinks he knows it all, exactly what needs to happen. It doesn't matter if your assistant coaches basically gave you their version of the game plan and gave you pointers of what to look out for and what to do before the game. You can't retain and remember all that stuff. No human is fast enough to basically basically compute information that quickly in real time and figure out what to do, especially given all the emotion. He's a very emotional guy. He's constantly yelling and he's constantly yelling and screaming at people. So you can tell he's emotional, and he does things, and when you're emotional like that, you're not always going to think clearly if you're emotional and you're yelling or if you're upset. And so it makes sense for him to communicate with his coaches during the game, but he just never does that. So it's just all Thibodeau by himself during these games. And so honestly, he's, I felt, I really felt like giving him an F on this one, but, I ended up giving him a D on this one. I'm not even sure where I gave him a D. I gave him a D on it. And so the next one is standards and player accountability. And so I have it broken down into, I have it for practice and I have it for the game. The reason why I broke it down was because, because we definitely know there's very little accountability for some players during the game. So that's why I gave him an F for standard and play accountability during games. But standards and play accountability during practice, or during practice and all that stuff, I gave him a B, because the reason why I gave him a B on that one was because it does sound like he calls people out. He obviously, there's a standard that they have, They want people to come in. You're supposed to come in. You're supposed to shoot around, work on your game, especially like, not during practice, but before practice or after practice. You're supposed to get your shots up, and he called out R.J. Barrett early in the season because R.J. Barrett wasn't doing that, and that's why one of the reasons why R.J. Barrett was really struggling with the shooting this whole year early in the season, because he wasn't putting in the amount of work that he was before. I'm just, we're not there. I'm not there to see how good, if there is truly accountability for these guys during practice. But I'm assuming there is something from how Tom Thibodeau talks, and also from some of the stuff you hear that the guys work really hard, especially the young guys. So there's definitely standards, and that's one of the things I like about Thibodeau. There are standards. He has standards in terms of like how to practice, and the amount of time you need to put into your craft before and after the games, right? And so I do like that about him. And so that's why I gave him a B for that one. But standards and play accountability during the games, I gave him an F, and it was mostly because of one person, and we all know who it is, Julius Randle. He just did not hold this guy accountable for anything. He didn't hold him accountable for his poor play on the court. He could have reduced his minutes, played Obi Toppin more, but he didn't do that. There was a lot of times by the middle of the season I started to really realize that Randall was just not even really playing defense, especially when he would miss a shot. If he missed the layup and didn't get a foul call, he wouldn't get back on defense. If he turned over the ball, he wouldn't get back on defense. And he did this constantly. And I could kind of see why the MSG faithful really started to boo him. Everyone thinks it's because, he's having this terrible shooting season. It's not because of that. The reason why is because he just doesn't hustle on the defensive end. And if there's one thing the New York Knicks fans cannot stand, is lack of effort, especially on the defensive end. Honestly, when a team plays terrible defense, it's even difficult for me to even watch the game. As long as the team tries on defense, they could be terrible offensively. I'll sit there and watch the games. But Randall, there was really no effort on the defensive end. And the crazy thing with him too, by the end of the season, he's such a he's such a dramatic guy with his body. His body language is very dramatic. And so it's very easy to tell what he's thinking or what his intentions are given with his body language. And by the end of the year, you can just tell he wasn't even attempting to play any defense at all. He would just let his man go backdooring him. And, if the ball was too far away and his man had the ball, it was a little too far, he wasn't trying to sprint out to challenge the shot. So the effort just wasn't there, and the coach didn't do anything about it. He did not hold him accountable, didn't even try to reduce the minutes. And so it's just, still played him 37, 38 minutes a game. And so, and the problem with that too is you have other guys watching this, right? And so what happens? So when RJ took over towards the end of the season, started taking over as a primary playmaker, do you know what RJ started doing? He started taking possessions off. And maybe it's not necessarily because, Julius Randle set that standard for RJ to look. It could just be the fact that the coach is playing. I think one of the major reasons is the coach is playing him 38 minutes a game. And then you're asking him to basically be the primary playmaker and play defense. So he's going to take some plays off. I get that. But he just, there's a lot of times where RJ just played really poor defense. And I think a lot of that has to do with, he feels if Julius can do it, why can't he do it? And so that's what he did. And so it's just really poor example that he sets. That he's allowing Julius to set for these young guys, and it's a big problem. And so that's pretty much how I basically arrived at these grades. Like I said, I assigned a number to each letter grade, and then what I did was I figured out, I basically, quick calculation just to figure out what the average was, and so it was a 3.8. And so the 3.8, I decided to give him a D plus. I know it's a little funny to give someone a D plus, but It is what it is. He had a terrible season. I mean, the coach had a terrible season. He really had a bad season, and I'm actually surprised that it was a D plus to a C minus because I really thought that the coach deserved an F. So if I didn't do this and I just turned on the mic and started shooting off my mouth and talking all sorts of craziness, I would have given the coach an F. But honestly, going through this analysis the way I did, it did, basically it kind of it allows you to think objectively about this stuff and think about all the stuff the coach does bring to the table. And, honestly, although it was a terrible season, but it kind of puts this in perspective. I know I'm probably contradicting myself because I say he had a terrible season and he didn't have a very good season. But a D plus is not an F, right? A D plus is actually closer to a C minus. If it was a C minus, I think people would be like a little happier about it. But it is what it is, and so that's what I have. Hey, let me know what you guys think. Please like, subscribe, comment below. What do you think about Thibodeau's season? What do you think about this analysis? Who do you guys want me to evaluate next? If you guys want me to evaluate any player on this team, I can do it. Just comment below. And thank you guys for watching. Have a good night.